Go through a brief history of what U.S. education was historically, how we kind of got to where we are, what's going on around the world, both in the countries that are doing really well, and then in the third world countries where people assume they aren't doing as well. And then a look at, can we privatize, do we need this amount of education, and then some other fun stuff at the end where I get really radical. Okay? This is the click gesture. There we go. So, historically, historians looked at education. They assumed that before the advent of public schooling, the U.S. was illiterate, no one knew anything, et cetera, et cetera. And then researcher known as by the name E.G. West came in, and he took a page out of Hayek and noticed that a lot of history is kind of written with a lot of bias. And he went back and he's like, okay, you know what? Everyone says it's common sense that before public education, the majority of Americans were illiterate. Let's actually check the data. He checked the data through a series of private and very small community schools and religious schools. Over 95% of Americans and the English, because English to Americans are very similar education-wise at the time, could read. There was education for almost everyone. Even the poor were getting it through donations. The only people that didn't get educated were generally just those who didn't want it, like if they were going to work in a family farm and they just didn't want to get educated. And of course, at the time, there was no mandatory schools. And then Horace Mann came along. He's known as the father of U.S. education, and his stated goal was not to educate the populace. There was actually no outcry at the time that we need people more educated to improve knowledge. It was, we need better soldiers, we need better workers, we need people that obey orders, that have one unified American culture. It kind of started after the Civil War when they reconstructed the South. There was a lot of mandatory education, especially of the people that used to be slaves, because they wanted to make them proper Christian Americans that follow the rules laid down by their betters. And Horace Mann kind of continued that trend and really ramped it up. The system that came over to America was the Prussian model of education. It's actually where the word school comes from. And the reason that came over was because the Prussian system, so the Prussians had a king back in the day, a dictatorship, and the military wouldn't listen. They had a colossal desertion rate. No one would stick around to fight for a king, so they had a very structured education system formed to make everyone realize that they're part of this country and they need to fight and die for it, and teach them to be good soldiers and workers. And then it came over to the U.S. for the same reason: make good soldiers, make good workers, and especially really started off in New York, where a lot of the major warehouse, large corporation owners funded it just because they wanted to have better factory workers, because Americans adjusted really badly to factory work. If you're interested in that, asking the Q&A about how the 5-day work week actually came about, that's a really funny story. And then going into the present, it kept centralizing, especially after the 1940s. 1979, Department of Education is founded, and it's finally the national level. Because in the very beginning, it was all local and cities, and it was the same throughout cities, and then on the state level, it was the same across the state, and then finally national. Throughout all of this, the equality drops dramatically. The cost rises exponentially, and class sizes fall, but class sizes don't really correlate to much except having more teachers' jobs, so the unions always push for more class sizes, but it's kind of side note. And then the U.S. right now, if you probably hear a bit about this in the news, lots of data. The one on the far right shows that we're just kind of performing at average or below average in terms of our test scores. Top left, we are second highest in the world in per capita spending per student. We keep throwing money at it, nothing fixes it. And then this bottom left one is the one that's kind of a bit sad, because we're not doing really well, but if you look at it in terms of innovation, so are we changing things to be better, we're also almost dead last in innovation. So we're not. So we're doing really badly, and we're not changing anything. So not that great. Then just a brief look at what a few of the other top countries in the world are doing, especially focusing on Finland, Japan, and South Korea. So the major keyword that you find there, if you look at all these schools in more detail, is school choice. The United States is one of the few areas in the world where you live sets where you go to school. You have no say unless you get a private education or homeschooled instead. Throughout most of the world, you have options. Finland has a full voucher system. Any student can go to any school. There is a voucher. If you live nearby, you're given like priority just because of commuting being difficult. But students shop around for high schools like we shop around for colleges. And with that also, a lot of students go to a trade school, or schools where you learn a job instead of just learning generic educational stuff for college. And then other countries similar, Sweden's pretty similar. South Korea has a moderately similar program, but the major thing for them is the after-school cram schools, where over 95% of all middle schoolers are going to cram schools, and people care more about how you're doing in cram school than in your public education that you're going through throughout the day. Although their system's not one you want to replicate because it involves a bit of a little bit high pressure on the students. The saying is, if you want to get in the top university, you sleep 3 hours per night. If you want to get into a mid to low class university, 4 hours per night. 5 hours per night or more, you're not getting to college. So not a system you exactly want to replicate, but it's at least interesting to know that they are very much, people are picking where they go to school and focusing on that. Japan, another thing, you apply to high schools like colleges, there are entrance exams to get in. For many of them, and over 30% of them are private. And then this is a really interesting thing. Third world countries, and this is data that's a little bit older just because it's mostly corrected from 2000 to 2010. The rate of absolute poverty in the world was actually decreased dramatically, so a lot of these areas aren't as poor anymore, so which is great, yay for capitalism. But if you're talking about people that make $1.25 to $2 a day, absolute poverty of the world in India and Bangladesh and China, what percentage of their children do you think are going to schools? And what percentage would you imagine are going to private schools? We're talking people who live on $1.25 a day. Just think of a number in your head. Would you guess over 65%? Over 65% of all students in the poorest areas of the world are going to private schools. That's kind of not exactly what you'd expect. I'm talking about people living on $1.25 a day, the whole family, and their children are still being able to go to private schools. And these schools cost $3 to $10 a month by the area. And the way that this, partially also due to lower cost of living there, and the teachers are paid much less. I believe they're paid a third to half of what the government teachers are, although the thing with the government teachers is a lot of times they don't actually show up to class. In those areas, there's a lot of accountability, and the schools are funded based on essentially getting students in seats. So there's schooling happening at the government schools in those countries, not a lot of education. And then if you want to say, oh, sure, you're saying they go to school, but it's like 4 kids in a room with a parent, so it's not like real school. No, these schools are also outperforming the public schools in terms of classrooms, in terms of clean water, in terms of all like physical amenities, except for gyms. Playgrounds. Government schools better playgrounds. It happens. They had to win somewhere. It's literally the only thing they win. So if you also look at test scores, these private schools helping the poorest in the world are dramatically beating the government in test scores across every subject. When you correct for IQ, when you correct for socioeconomic class, it's still, they're beating them. They literally, the group that did this, also the EGUS Center, took the data and gave it to other groups to like run the data and see if they were missing something. And no, they're just beating them across the board in every single way. And then also you even have areas where more government schools are added. Parents don't send their kids to the government schools, or they actually send their children to government schools and take them out and put them back into private schools, because when your kid goes to government school, you have no say in how the school's run. If you go in and you talk to the teacher, the principal, they don't have to actually change anything because you're not a paying customer. They get paid no matter what. And then this is an interesting interview that I'm going to send the link to your officers. They can distribute it to you for just the PowerPoint because I have a few different videos in there. This one is about a libertarian entrepreneur that decided to just make his own private schools. You can probably guess a little bit of the contents, outperforming the public easily. But the interesting thing is the cost of the school is under $40,000 a year per student. And if you know much about the U.S. public education system, average cost of students is well over $10,000 a year. And for more expensive districts, somewhere like New York, it can get upwards of $20,000 a year, even for the failing schools. So that's just an interesting thing, because I'll reference that number a little bit. So looking at can we privatize both, we have historically been private. We have a functional education system that's entirely private. And then if we look at other places around the world, even places much, much poorer than us, they're able to have a functional private system. So it's not a question of just cost. And even in terms of cost, if we look at the United States right now, we're donating nearly $40 billion a year just to colleges every year. That's not even counting all the supplies and teaching time and everything else donated to like lower level schools. If you took that $40 billion a year, that would almost cover every single child in poverty for the $4,000 a year that a private school is able to charge if you had a less regulated private school. And there's a number of barriers to entry that you can remove to make things work better. For example, if you want to teach any degree whatsoever in the United States, you not only need to have a bachelor's degree, you also need to have gone through another separate multiple sets of certification processes and student teaching for, I believe it's at least a semester. And then of course you also need to join the union and so on. Why can't, if someone's really good with students, they just teach? I mean, if you could even have them work in the school first. You can have them work student teacher or something else. But why do they need to have a bachelor's degree? That's just an added cost, an added barrier to entry to make it so there is a shortage of teachers in the U.S. And relative to the amount of education that teachers get, they're not paid very well because you don't need as much. If you're teaching an elementary school kid, you don't need to get through a bachelor's level of math. I mean, it's not that hard. It's 1 + 1 is 2 makes 4. Okay. Yeah. And then now to get to the more controversial part. So there's an excellent book here. I actually have. So I got to see this debate live in New York because I got really lucky, and I have my signed copy of the book with me at all times, of course. This is The Case Against Education by Brian Kaplan. He's had a number of podcast interviews on it, so the book's not cheap. I'd recommend listening to podcast interviews first.
Brian Kaplan was at the VCon last year, I think.
Yeah, no, he comes to a lot of conventions. He's great. Only he was more on stream, but he's different question. This is a neat debate between him and a Harvard professor at Harvard economist on the subject of should we remove all government funding from college and universities. Brian Kaplan, other professor, do not remember his name because I'm really rude. I think is it Ed? I don't know. You'll have to watch the debate and tell me. So I would recommend watching this. It goes through stuff. I'm going to really briefly skim through a lot of data that he lays out in very clear detail with cited sources and everything else. So some of the claims I'm making are going to sound a little bit weird. Trust me, there's evidence to back it up, and ask any questions you have. So right now in the United States, we are getting more education than we need. And I'm just going to go through, there's essentially 3 arguments for the amount of education that we have. Economic, hey, if you have a more educated society, they're more productive, and education provides valuable information. On a personal development level, school socializes you, it lets you experience more professions and jobs, and then lets you see more ideas and cultures, prepares you for the real world. Humanitarian argument is that if you're working for equality of opportunity, you need to give everyone an equal starting line, and you do that through a free education system. But essentially, the 3 main arguments for government provision of schools and for the amount of schooling that we have. So in terms of economic argument, the vast majority of what you learn will have no application for the rest of your life. I am currently working as a mechanical engineer. I went through, what is that, differential equations, that's calculus 4, I believe. And then I took the next couple steps beyond that as well. Many people that were with me even took calculus, they took math minors because we already had all the credits for it. Like literally it was one extra class, you got a math minor. The highest level of math that I've used on my job is geometry. And I used it twice now. And when I used it, the people around me were shocked because they hadn't used it in 20 years. It was like it was more math than they had seen in 20 years. When I did my basic geometric things, I wanted to find a center of mass of a testing block. Yeah, no, it was, yeah, no. And then beyond that, adults don't remember the things that are in education. 40% of Americans can't name one First Amendment right. And if we had taken it for like a semester, I'd be like, okay, yeah. How many years did you have of like government and history? I'm thinking at least 7, right? Because you had U.S. history in AP, then like you have a bit of Schoolhouse Rock and everything. 40% can't name one.
All right.
Which is also just a great sign for democracy, but hey. And then among Americans who took foreign language, less than 1% say they learned to speak a foreign language well in school. And once again,
Me.
oh yeah, tú hablas un poco de español, yo entiendo. So, I'm someone that really values foreign language. I speak 4 languages, I self-study daily, I teach other people language, I work as a volunteer for an organization to send people out of the country to learn language better. If you're spending 3 years, an hour a day, every day, plus homework, and you get nothing out of it, that's just wrong. I mean, that's time stolen from you and wasted from you. And in terms of that, I don't want someone forced to try to speak Spanish that doesn't care about Spanish because they won't learn it well. And if anything, they'll hate it more and they won't study on their own. Like education, school quashes education because no one cares about it anymore. And then beyond that, even just in terms of speaking linguistics specifically, if you want to learn linguistics, it's really well documented how to do it well. Countries like Belgium are excellent at it because everyone in Belgium speaks at least 3 or 4 languages depending on region. You just have an immersion language lesson in the classroom. Just American schools don't do that because it's top down. This is how we teach education. You're not allowed to vary from that. So, there's actually a lot of other literature going on about this in terms of, and then actually the really big one is, sorry, I'm gonna go in the wrong order. Also, there's a lot of talk about, well, sure, you're never gonna like use the American Indian Wars later in your life, but you're learning how to learn. You're learning critical thinking skills. There's an entire field dedicated to this called educational psychology. And after maybe 20 or 30 years of research with people that really want to find the result that you learn how to learn, they have not found evidence of it. It's just not a thing. People are really bad at taking knowledge that they learned here and applying it somewhere else. And if you look at like critical thinking, if you go like high school to college to graduate degree, critical thinking goes up. But if you look at the same person who when they started and ended college, critical thinking doesn't change at all. It's just that people with more critical thinking just go to college, so it looks like college graduates have better critical thinking. You don't learn any critical thinking in college. If I'm gonna say you lose some, but hey. And then the really big thing happening is that education does provide value to you personally. It provides a large increase to your salary. It gets you better jobs, but on a societal level, if it doesn't skill up the workforce, then it's not good for society as a whole. And you see this in terms of if you look at increase of earnings per year of college versus increase of labor force productivity in country as a whole per year increase of education on average, there isn't much. So essentially, once again, 80% of what you learn is never used again. Basically, all you need to know is basic numbers and like reading and writing is what you learn and value in school. But then I'm going to go a little bit more in detail into the effect of why education has a large personal return, not a societal return. Something called the signaling model of education. It's a little bit complicated, so I want to diagram to make sure it's perfectly clear. and this is an example used to explain signaling for economists, so I'm going to try to do it well. Imagine you're at like a rock concert or a movie, and you're all sitting down, and you have like kind of a mediocre view of the stage. What can you do to instantly, like, for really low cost, dramatically increase your returns, your results, to see the stage better? Stand up. You stood up. Great. Everyone stands up. You know what? Standing up works great. Let's bring a crate. You're gonna stand on a crate. Everyone stands on crates. All of a sudden, you go to your rock concert and you have to carry a 40-pound crate, and everyone's carrying a crate, and you're standing through the whole concert, and it's awful, and everyone is paying a dramatic, larger cost, but there's no overall benefit. If one person brings 2 crates, they get a big personal benefit, but overall as a whole, every bit of standing up and every bit of extra crates is a waste to the society, which is where it comes in with government education, because what's happening is, as for educating people, it looks like you're more accomplished, but you're not adding skills, and everyone wants to become more accomplished to get better jobs, and overall, the almost $1 trillion a year the government spends on education is mostly just a waste. Another example of this would be if you look at the difference with a diamond. If you're going to if you want to raise the value of a diamond, you either go to a gem cutter or an appraiser. A gem cutter takes a diamond and like cuts it, makes it really pretty, and adds value to it. An appraiser just puts a big sticker on it that says, "That's a good one." So,
Wait,
yeah.
before we move on.
No, the next couple slides are on it also. But yeah.
Because like I was thinking, like these boxes, like would the educational equivalent be like higher standards?
No, the educational equivalent would be something like this, just the amount of education completed. It used to be it was standard for most people to not even finish high school, and now the new standard is bachelor's degree. So essentially, because now for many people, if you want to even work as a waiter, they require a college degree. Yeah, no, for like higher end establishments, you either need to have a long history of waiting tables other places, or they'll like let you in with an associate's degree. Because the thing is, if you have a bunch of applicants and a third of them have college degrees and 2/3 of them don't, they'll just go with one of the college degrees first.
Was that a generalization, or do you actually know places that only hire waiters if you have a bachelor's?
There are, I know anecdotal stories. I haven't. The last time I applied to a waiting job, it was a long time ago. Yeah, fancier places, not most places, I will say. Luckily, that would really suck. But you run into things like how 40% of college graduates get jobs that don't require college degrees, and only 30% of college graduates get jobs that are in their degrees and in their majors, which if college majors actually added value in that field, you would think that you wouldn't be getting jobs that are outside the major. And then general economic trends. So what a college degree is actually telling your employers, it's not that you have this bunch of super important knowledge, it's that you follow rules, are a team player, conform, are at least decently smart, and like get things done. And it's a very valuable thing for companies, because for companies, hiring and then training someone and having to fire them later is a big cost. But once again, the government spends like almost $1 trillion in education a year. So it's a very big cost to society as a whole. And then people talk about, oh, well, education's passed the market test, so it must be good. Well, first off, it's really hard to change. If you're trying to signal conformity, you can't really signal conformity in a new, like, exciting, innovative way, because then you're a nonconformist. And also, it's not a free market thing, and once again, it's $1 trillion backing from the government.
Wait.
And also, anyone else's questions, feel free to ask anytime.
I guess like the thing with the crates and people standing up.
Yeah.
Like if that's people learning more, like I understand the arguments that you are making, but I wonder for some who might be why exactly is people learning more a bad thing?
Because the things you're learning don't have value.
So it's not the critical thinking. It's not.
The critical thinking is
Right.
not something you learn in college. Like it's a completely different thing. There's a lot of educational psychology research showing you don't learn how to learn, you don't learn critical thinking, or at least to a very small amount.
Or reasoning.
And in terms of things that you learn, literally I took a 5-year degree in mechanical engineering. The only thing that I have applied is unit conversions. And geometry, but I learned geometry in middle school.
Yeah. So
Unit conversions, 5 years. Every single engineer at my job has to have at least a bachelor's degree. And also what you see a lot of in the United States is people have a higher degree for doing the same job. So it used to be, I'm trying to do the job off the top of my head. It used to be if you worked on a foreman in a construction site, it was someone who was a high school degree. Now it's someone who's a bachelor's degree. There's a lot of jobs where there has been no increase in cognitive demand. There's been not a large change in technology, but there's been a dramatic inflation of what credential you need to get a job. If these credentials were adding knowledge, that would be fine. If they were increasing the productivity of the workforce, that would be fine. They're not, at least 80% of it's not. There's some part of it that has some value. Like if I went into fluid mechanics, then I would have used one class, 2 classes, depending on the fluid mechanics.
So you're arguing that the standing up to crates, that's just
It's
extra
weights.
knowledge that we don't really need. It's
It's-
being forced upon us to make it look like we're quality candidates.
Yeah, you need this sticker of approval, this college degree to say you're a quality candidate. Actually, there's another good example. If your increase in pay was about the knowledge, every single year of college would dramatically increase your pay. Because if you have 3 years of college, you have 3/4 of the knowledge. So I mean, sure, you wouldn't get paid as much as a graduate, but you get paid something. Over 80% of the value from college is just the last year and even the last day, just when you get your diploma. If college had value beforehand, people be hiring people that took 2 or 3 years. But fast question, in the room, show of hands. Would you rather right now have your diploma and be done, but with all the knowledge you only currently have? Or would you rather have all the knowledge but still need to keep going the rest of college to get your diploma? Who would rather have the knowledge? Okay, I'm seeing it. Who would rather have the diploma? Yeah, if you said diploma, that's how you get jobs. Also know for most engineering firms I was looking at to hire, they all have 3 months to 2 years of just training once you start the job, because they all assume that you don't know how to do what's at their job. Not because UC is a very bad engineering school. It's not. It's a good school. We have lots of co-ops and things that help train people outside the classroom. It's just that it's really specialized knowledge that they can't teach you every single kind of engineering and UC. It makes no sense. Okay, sorry, got distracted. Personal development. School socializes you, exposes you to, jobs, exposes you to different ideas and culture, prepares you for the real world. So the question that all economists always ask forever, and there's a lot of jokes about it, is compared to what? If it's compared to sitting alone in your room and playing Pokemon all day, school probably socializes you.
Is that a personal example?
Hey, I will have you know, they had perfect IVs. Now, who's nerd enough to get that joke? Okay.
All the bad.
No, you don't even know. Getting perfect IVs takes 2 or 3 days of just grinding. Yeah, it's great. I broke my foot. Yeah. Okay. Stop being mean. I'm being bullied. See, it's another problem in school. But if you're comparing it to actually being on the job, school is a terrible place to socialize you. You're forced to sit down and shut up. You don't get to talk. You just stand in a line, march along, and follow orders. You get barely any time outside. If you look at how children best educate and react, it is out playing, having fun. It's being involved with people of different age ranges. 5-year-olds learn best from 10 and 15-year-olds, not 40-year-olds. There's a lot of research on this. If you look at something like the Montessori method of education, it's a really good example of how this works out. And the only reason the Montessori method got accepted, and they're simply a thing of kind of letting kids more roam around, do what they want, and learn through diffusion. The only reason it got accepted because originally she was the person who started Montessori was only allowed to do it to children with special needs, and the children with special needs were doing so well they were outperforming the students without special needs. So they finally realized the method works and applied it to all students, but they didn't keep scaling it up for more years. So there's numerous problems with that in terms of socializing. And in terms of exposing you to different kinds of jobs, kind of sampling plate idea, well, you see a little bit of everything, so now you know what you really want to do. Well, if you look at what a high school curriculum does, it trains you to be a mathematician, a historian, a writer, an actor, a musician, not much else. If you apply for a job in history, you, at least according to historians that I've listened to, you will never apply to a job that has less than 500 other applicants. To give you a really scary statistic when anyone's major is history, and I apologize. The average year, more people with a history major graduate than there are total jobs in history in the United States. Yeah.
History's my best subject.
I'm so sorry. I love history. It's a big hobby of mine. I'm an engineer. There's lots of jobs for engineers. But yeah, and then musician, it's even worse. I'm so sorry. Although there are more opportunities these days, especially with YouTube and things, which is great. Writers. You don't see, that's one of the reasons why America has an insane shortage of plumbers, electricians, welders. Welding makes you 6 figures. And it's like a 1.5 degree, and you're a welder. You make 6 figures.
I don't want to get dirty.
Yeah, you I don't look this up.
But yeah, no, so there's lots of things like that. And then also, and even looking into this in terms of return on investment for school, when economists calculate return on investment in school for even individuals, they're not factoring in how many people don't finish school. Obviously, if you start school and don't finish, school is a terrible return on investment because your value is only from the diploma, and especially, I believe right now, white males are the current group that are very at risk of dropping out of school a lot of the time. So, sorry. No, there's a whole other interesting thing on that. And then in terms of socializing and time for letting experience different ideas, schools are a little bit monolithic in terms of having a couple of particular ideologies. It's not a very wide range of opinions. It roughly goes like Bernie Sanders to maybe Mitt Romney, but Mitt Romney's kind of the same as Obama, so it's a bit of a narrow range. I didn't even know there was an argument against minimum wage until after I graduated. But there are many arguments, and they're all great. And then things like, hey, we need to give people a culture and have them read Shakespeare. Who here had to read Shakespeare in school? Who here now reads Shakespeare for fun? I read a little bit, not much. I think people would like Shakespeare more if it wasn't forced on them at 14-year-olds with pubescent teens trying to badly sing love songs to each other, or whatever it happened. Whatever Shakespeare, sonnets, not songs. Oh, Romeo! But yeah, no, if it wasn't forced on people, there would be less of people might like it more. I don't see why forcing high culture on people is a good thing. My brother grew to hate reading because of how much he had to do in school, and now he's finally getting back into it and liking it more. And also, it's really elitist to think that everyone has to read Shakespeare. Some people just doesn't matter, don't care. Yeah. So, humanitarian aspect. Schools give everyone an equal playing field. First things first, the schools for the poor in the United States suck. I mean, it's not the only argument, that's a pretty big one. And then, of course, credential inflation is a major thing. I actually should have pulled the graph from a different spot over here. It used to be that if you didn't finish high school, the majority of people didn't finish high school. It wasn't that big a deal. You could still get a starting job, work your way up, and so on. And obviously, it'd be better if you did finish, but it wouldn't be the end of the world. Now, the majority of people would go to college. If you don't finish high school, you're kind of stuck. unfortunately, maybe even permanently, because that's the system we now live under. And the more we cause credential inflation, the more we are hurting the poorest and the most, the least well-off people among us, especially because they don't have this, even if they get the grants to go to college, they don't get as much of a support system, which has been shown to be a large impact on getting through college. Then schools also can be a really terrible influence on students. It's where you're exposed to gangs, where you're exposed to drugs, where people get pregnant early, and so on. And then if you really wanted to help the poor and remove the minimum wage, remove licensure laws, all kind of things like that would do far more. Of course, if you have questions asked in the Q&A. I'm also against child labor laws. I'm extremist. Ask away. I'm happy to answer. And then the moral case against public schools. Imagine if Walmart ran the schools. And every day, your child walked in and they sat down at their desk, with along the wall are just pictures of all the Walmart CEOs. First things first in the day, they're required to stand up and give their pledge to Walmart. And then they sit down and they open their Walmart license textbooks to read about how the first Walmart CEO never told a lie, and how the 16th Walmart CEO ended slavery. And just, I'd be kind of freaked out, just a little. I don't know, if you like Walmart, imagine, I don't know, Starbucks doing it or something. It could just be just a little bit off.
Public school, it isn't really mandatory,
It was, up until recently, was entirely mandatory. You could not homeschool, and if you do not go, you are subject to the force of the law, which is actually the next thing we're going to go into in one sec. Are you saying it's not mandatory in the sense that you can have private school, or what are you saying? Well, private schools in the United States are granted licensure to work by the government. They only in certain regions, many times because of the strict requirements on them, also requiring them to use certain level of teachers. They cost over $10,000 a year. I mean, some people can afford it. A lot of Americans can't, and they're kind of stuck.
Wait, so you're saying if a private school is doing something, the government wouldn't they have some regulation they can put over them?
Yeah, there's a significant amount of regulation by the government on private schools,
Okay.
especially charter schools. They're and voucher ones and so on.
Would you think that, I went to private middle school, elementary school, $6,000 a year,
Mhm.
ridiculous. If,
That's actually on the cheaper end.
yeah, it's,
It's,
if we were to privatize schools, or move towards that, would you think there'd be a drop in private education?
what do you think could be dropping private education in terms
Yeah,
of what?
would it be more affordable for more people then?
Oh yeah, no, dramatic drop, especially. But another big part of it is removing things like the monopolies that exist.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's right now, you can't open up a school, especially for colleges. I know there's a national accreditation agency that is given powers by the government to be the only accreditor for the United States. They choose who becomes a college. If you want to become a college to get accredited, you need to have at least a certain size campus, a certain size library, a certain size so on, so no online schools can ever compete with them. For lower schools, it is pretty bad as well. The rules vary by state to state, and it's not as bad. It used to be that homeschooling was pretty much illegal throughout the United States, but Christian conservatives in the late 1900s kind of pushed through that. It's interesting if you ever look, the people that are kind of on the outside are the ones that are really fighting for your rights, because no one cared about homeschooling except the Christian conservatives that wanted to teach creationism, and now, it's kind of true, and now homeschooling is spreading. In fact, most colleges preferentially want homeschooled students, and it is spreading to less affluent minority groups as well, which is great. Or if you ever look at the real warriors of free speech right now are the juggalos, because they're getting cracked down on. They're getting labeled terrorist groups and shut down by the FBI, so they're the ones fighting for free speech. But yeah, sorry, bit of a digression.
Walmart.
So yeah, no, so the Walmart thing, and then to go through this. Here, because keep looking. I'll tell you when to hit the next one. Stop. Go back to. Okay. So this is a case, 15-year-old girl, that she skipped school more than the 5 excused absence she was allowed to take, sent to jail. Next one, parents are also often arrested for their students not showing up or showing up late. Let's see. In one county in the U.S. alone, over 1,600 parents have been arrested for their children not coming to school enough. Actually, I blinked.
Okay, let's read these.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Go back.
And I think the article I clicked that one from was interesting because it was primarily about a woman where her children, her youngest two, had skipped school a few times, and she kept getting saddled with court fines, and she couldn't pay them, and the judge wouldn't accept the paperwork that she said she couldn't pay them with, and eventually it just ran her out of money, and then she died in a hospital from a completely preventable illness because she had no money to pay hospital fees because of the $2,000 per absence truancy fine.
I think I was definitely in high school. I noticed I was a sophomore. I had a infection in my foot where I had 13 days in the hospital,
Yeah.
and therefore I wasn't in school. And I don't remember exactly what the warning was, but I was definitely flagged by school.
Oh yeah, no, these are unexcused as defined by the school.
Yeah.
So if your parent says, I need them at home because, like, if your parent says, we need to go to someone's funeral because someone died, it's like an important thing for their life that we need to go, and the school says no, you can get arrested. Hey, sounds great. Sorry. So there are a few more that are interesting. Of course, lots of people taken away from homes, a lot of students arrested as well. And here's a really fun one. What? Does that get cut off? Yeah. When students are forced onto ADD pills and other stuff by the school and teachers. And an actually very interesting study is if you look at which school which states follow the No Child Left Behind model and say that schools get funding based on how well their students do. If a school gets funding based on how well their students do, and a teacher gets paid based on how well their students do, they have a dramatically higher rate of ADD pills prescribed. Because the teacher says, oh, that kid has bad grades. Adderall will fix it. Especially for poor, lower income people, because once again, just due to socioeconomic class things, they're less likely to kind of argue back and speak up against someone in a position of authority like a teacher.
I heard that Xanax helps too, is that true?
I'm pro the legalization of all drugs, but I'm in a complete square. I'm hoping to try marijuana for the first time this spring, because I'm going to be in California for a week.
This is the whitest thing I've ever
I have planned out when I will be trying my marijuanas. Do I inject it, or do I, like, put it in a spoon?
Try with brownies or something, or smoke.
It's supposed to be like body wash.
Body wash.
Topical use.
Got it. I'll take your word.
I hear I'm good.
Is it a bath? Can I get this a bath bomb? Can it be lavender flavored?
Wait, there could be a lot of money in that.
Oh, there probably is. Although the funny thing is California and Colorado still have a large marijuana black market because the taxes are so high, it makes more sense to buy the black market.
Yeah.
Yeah, but wait, but if we
But I'm a
tax
square, I'll be
weed,
buying it.
then we have more money for our schools.
You're not technically wrong. Did you have a public education by chance?
Only 2 years.
Oh, I didn't have my hand up.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
In Colorado, they can do cannabis and alcohol.
Oh, yeah.
You can get simultaneously.
Okay, now, they're also putting it in lube now.
Oh, who?
Yeah, so pop quiz. These all describe one place. Read through a little bit. You can just get a few of them, and we're gonna figure out what place it is. Let's see. They have strict rules about how and when you can talk to people. You're always cooped up inside. They don't prepare people for like being on the outside. They do like a really bad job. Regional monopolies. You're forced with people you have nothing in common with, and even sometimes there's violence, and you're still forced back together with them. It's a really important part of government that needs reform, but has to be handled publicly. They have a really strong public union that lobbies for how things are run, and of course, things haven't really changed for a while, and it's really harmful for inner city youth. The answer to this pop quiz is obviously prisons. Was I describing school? Oh, you can't tell the difference?
I was thinking of
What? Oh, golly gee. Schools are no different from prisons. You.
Yeah, but they usually send kids to prison. That's the difference. City usually.
Day prisons are. about not as bad, but
I was thinking that island where they had the pig head on a stick and there's flies flying around. What?
They were outside.
Dropped those glasses.
They cook it.
Or Simon.
so
I don't know his name.
It's Simon.
just a brief summary. Public schools are not only having public schools and having mandatory not only says that the government owns your children and controls what they do, but they do a terrible job at educating your students for a crazy price. And not only has the US system not made the smallest of reforms like public choice, but we used to have a fully functional private system, and places even much poorer than us around the world have private systems. It can't be an overnight transition, because obviously a lot of people get stuck in the lurch, but even things like giving parents back tax credits if they don't send their kids to public schools, there are small minor reforms that can be made to push in this direction and end what is a terrible system that steals years and years of people's lives, steals their creativity, and gives them horrible trauma, makes them able to make friends in the real world. Any questions? I have a few sources cited in here, just in case you're curious. No State Education, just a free ebook. It's pretty short. There's lots of podcasts. Case Against Education is excellent. Sheldon Richman, Separating School and State, is a pretty good book. He has some free interviews out also because books are expensive. Pauline Dixon, she has a TED Talk, but there's a few other books, like the James Tooley Beautiful Trees, the same thing on free schools in the third world. The E.G. West Center, it's great. His book, Education in the State, is the history of Britain and their private schools. I believe the newer edition has the history of the U.S. as well. And the John Taylor Gatto has some good stuff, and one of his books is actually posted for free online. School Sucks Project is great podcast, and they actually do a breakdown of John Taylor Gatto's work in podcast form and a lot of other good stuff. And yeah, lots of things. So, questions. I mentioned a lot of things.
Right. You said white males are dropping out.
Yes.
At an alarming rate. Why
Yeah.
is that?
Let's see, Christina Hoff Sommers I believe, is the one that did the work, The War on Boys. But so she's a good person to look to for this. A lot of it just has to do with boys and girls are different and act differently and have different things they want to do. And a lot of education right now is tailored more towards women. Things like sitting down and being still for an hour is something that a girl does easier than a guy, just because hormones are real and guys are more difficult at that. The kind of things like biting a Pop-Tart into the shape of a gun, or wrestling, or writing a story about monsters destroying the city are things that a young boy is very normal to do and will currently get you suspended as an elementary student.
Going off of that, have you
Yeah.
seen the Prager University video called The War on Boys?
Is that one was done by Christina Hoff Sommers? Was that?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I think I have.
seen that.
Yeah,
It's a pretty
I've
good
seen it
video.
too.
Their stuff it's hit or miss. Some of it's good,
Yeah.
but especially when they talk about the Civil War, it's awful.
Yeah.
No.
But yeah, so they're good on some. They're good on some things. They're terrible on the Civil War if it ever comes
Yeah.
up.
I hit or miss by who?
Couldn't I've only heard it as a leader.
All of this be chalked up to culture.
How to break it down?
I mean,
The United States used to have the
everything would be fine if people were just hardworking or even just
Yeah,
did things.
so the United States used to have one of the best educational systems in the world. It wasn't a problem. And if you look at just in terms of hardworking, a very simple example would be comparing Finland to South Korea. Once again, in South Korea, it's standard that you go to multiple cram schools, you leave for school at 6 a.m., and you get home after midnight most nights. Finland, I meant to say, Finland, sorry. I forgot to make sure Finland and Norway for a second. Finland is fairly standard to have around 6 hours of school a day, and there is no homework. They have very similar test scores.
Yeah, because I was just thinking maybe that really actually okay about it. Because
Yeah.
Finland, like their country, just a very like hard-working, small. Like,
But it's not-
very-
But it's not
like South Korea is
consistent.
big.
It's not consistent across
Same with South
It's not
Korea.
consistent across the other Scandinavian countries. Finland's it's not the same between them all, and they're all relatively small, homogeneous. Like Denmark doesn't do as well in schools as Finland, and in the United States, It's even a problem if you look at like smaller subgroups, and then, and even in countries like Finland, a lot of education is still not worth much value. Like even if the failures in the schools were just due, like in terms of the United States having students do worse, was just due to culture, that still wouldn't explain why we have to spend so much more on education than someone else, or also wouldn't answer the argument that virtually everyone should reduce the amount of money spent on education. So and then beyond that, the United States had a functional education system once, so it's not just a question of US culture, and the United States system has dropped very steadily in line with major development, centralization, where if you're looking at terms of major shifts in US culture, they occur in different years. For example, if you're looking at the scores of the African Americans in the United States, those would probably have dropped more around the 60s and 70s, when you see a major change in black unemployment rates due to the combination of the war on drugs and separating parents through things like subsidizing single motherhood, but you see the drop in education being constant throughout that. So it doesn't seem to have fallen in line to like major cultural trends and shifts. Sorry if that's wordy.
So if like how much knowledge we're shoving in kids' heads is not like, really that important.
It's not important, they don't even remember it.
So then like how should we be measuring the success of our education? Because obviously if we're gonna like do a different model like test scores would be low.
No. Math matters, reading matters. Not much else you learn in school is relevant. If you really wanted to help other things, it would just be let them go to, actually the vocational schools issue is a bit complicated just because the United States vocational workers generally look down on and look down on schools, and they've been kind of falling in number, but let children work as apprentices, let people intern for like $5 an hour and start education. I will say the nice thing about educational psychology is there's no person like too dumb or too down to do a job. Anyone can learn a thing, and practicing a subject well, like practicing something well, always makes someone better. It's just a question of how long you practice something. But, so if you wanted to try to fix this, it would be just reduce the amount of education until we're just learning what you need to know, and then after that, letting them learn things on the job and relevant skills. So it's not even a question of how to measure the education system, it's the things the education system is trying to measure, many of them shouldn't even be taught in the first place.
Would you say that this argument applies to like a country like Germany, where they have their vocational schools are like public?
Yeah, they have a large amount of vocational schools, and that does a lot better for their economy, and that with their school choice, their school system's doing better. I definitely agree that that kind of model is working better, especially Finland as well. It's very similar. Doing better doesn't mean doing best. I think this would do better than that even. Just generally speaking, if you're looking at in terms of efficiency and effectiveness and adapting well to the market, private is better than public. Because right now you have vocational schools in Germany for plumbers, electricians, and welders, and that's all very important. But is there a vocational school for coders? Is there a vocational school for whatever else? Those things might not have sprung up yet. If it was left to the free market, if you look at how much money is being made right now in just coding boot camps across the US, there would be high school coding, like technical schools, that would have sprung up in like a week. But because there is still more amount of regulation and red tape to go through when you're doing through the government, that doesn't occur as much. So it's a much better system in the US. I would say it's not the end goal.
I would say it's also like a private-public relationship, because a lot of the companies rely on that workforce directly from that trade school, because they can do like co-ops and things a lot of times. So
Definitely. And then also the problem that you run through is that even older people will then glamorize their school experience, and then still give money to it and support it, and they hire. Or if you look at someone like Google, they claim that they hire people that are just really good coders that didn't go through education. If you look at what they actually hire, it's like 1 to 5 people a year that like won some coding competition, and thousands upon tens of thousands that just have a degree. And also across all startup companies, that I think a bit over a decade ago, like towards the start of the boom, they were hiring people just based off skills because there wasn't a degree in the field. You just hired someone based off what they knew. All of Silicon Valley's been moving more and more towards hiring based off degrees. And there's also a whole bunch of stuff with HR systems being a large, very left-leaning bureaucracy, which is very biased toward education and other things, which I think does well.
So, what do you think the transition would look like?
That's the hardest question you can ask.
Yeah, because
That-
I mean,
yeah.
like, I can imagine.
In
it
terms
would
of
be a lot.
transition policies, I would definitely say a big one would be let someone opt out of school and not pay for it. Because right now, if you opt out of school and you homeschool, you are now paying the taxes for the school and paying your way privately to homeschool or to private school, whatever else. So a big part of it would just be a tax credit to say, hey, I don't want to go to your terrible public school. I want to do my own option. Don't make me pay for it. So that would be the biggest part of it, and kind of what the market answers from there. I mean, homeschooling is not the end all be all. It's the one that I like best. It does not work for everyone. Things like that private school started Libertarian. He's starting a branch and chain of them that are starting up. There are so many free resources online. You can literally take, actually, another reason why you can pick the signaling module education is correct. My graduate level courses that I took, the entire book is online, and the entire lectures are online by an MIT professor using the exact same slides my teacher used, because he literally uses the slides that came with the textbook. You could literally take the entire graduate level mechanical engineering design course that I took without paying a cent. Would it get you a job? Probably not. Just a small chance it would. But, and also things like Khan Academy, obviously. There's YouTube, iTunes University, if you ever want to learn a foreign language. And there's lots of resources that exist now. You can get a full education on YouTube.
You know the example we run through, like you mentioned, like what if Walmart runs schools, but you have the example, it's like, what if the government ran grocery stores, like they're in schools, you know one?
Oh yeah,
Can you run through that for us?
I don't think I remember that one. I've heard it before, but
It's like if you were like assigned a grocery store based on where you live and things like that.
yeah, no, it's, so imagine if you're living somewhere, you're assigned a grocery store based off where you live, you had no say in the matter, you were forced to pay for it, people that never shop at your grocery store are forced to pay for it, you have no say what's on the shelves, and everyone gets the same food. It's not, yeah, it's not great. But Venezuela's trying it, and they're losing a lot of weight. That's healthy, right?
Wow.
Right, the communist diet. It works for
You know,
everyone.
I stopped eating too.
Wait, you were drinking, you just gonna die later.
Yeah, no.
Good trend.
I will
Good
also
trend
say
leader.
the government, it's really amazing that after all the terrible things the government does, that the highest death rate is from like the food guidelines. That's a whole different story.
Oh,
And I'm surprised no one's asking a question like I threw out that I want to abolish child labor laws and
That's a
minimum
long
wage.
time.
Yeah, but we
No.
know.
We're going on school right now.
You said, like a criticism of public schools is that you, kids meet like gang members there and drugs
Yeah.
and stuff. Wouldn't they also meet those in private schools?
It's a possibility. The thing is that right now, if you're a poor mother living in the slums of Chicago, your children are forced to go to that school. You have no say in where they go to school. If you try to stop them from going to that school, you will be arrested. Your children will be taken from you. You won't be forced to go to a private school. Like, you might not have the best options, but you will at least have options. You will at least have choice, or at least you'll be able, at least you won't be forced to pay for it if you choose not to go.
You could work too. I mean, like
Yeah.
a lot of those kids aren't really like they may show up to school, they may show up for like free meals, they may show up to like see people, but they're not actually. Even if they do go to class, they're not doing any homework. Or, I mean, they're just idling by. And is that like a good use of their time?
Another thing would be if you look at the example of the schools in the third world, because those are regions that are very bad. The people they're teaching aren't far away removed teachers. They're community members that are good with kids that want to teach and do it as a passion. It'd be the difference, like if you actually if your parents knew the teacher as a friend and had grown up with them and have more say in what goes on in the classroom and more involvement kind of thing, rather than what's happening in inner cities, because the teacher and the parents are an entirely different socioeconomic class, because all the teachers are required to have a bachelor's degree, and most of the parents in the slums of Chicago don't have a bachelor's degree, just like statistically.
If a mom wants to move his kid to a safer school, wouldn't that safer school most likely have had a higher median income, which will mean most likely more expensive than the school they're going to go in?
Yeah, there's a decent chance of that, but it's also a question of you could have more schools. Instead of having one school serving an area, you could have multiple schools serving an area. It's not a perfect solution. It doesn't fix everything. It's just better than what we're currently working with.
What sort of things can we do, like what could a local school district do to start like fixing the education system? Like what would happen if a local school district said like we're gonna do vouchers or something like that? Like, what sort of small like steps you can make on local level?
If you look at something that's happened more on the state level, removing some of the union power has been good, because if you know much about the public union for teachers, once they've been voted in, there is never another vote to say if the union should end. Like once 51% of the teachers have voted for the union, there is never a re-vote. There is never another time, hey, do you actually want to keep the union? Have they been doing well or doing bad? So something like allowing people to get out of that. And then once you have the union gone, there's a lot more innovation that can be done. Let's say Scott Walker, governor of
Wisconsin, and no longer.
Was it awkward?
When he passed, he removed a lot of power from unions. Not allowed schools to do things like pay teachers based on quality.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I know. So with the union,
Why do you hate poor kids?
one time one of them like brought me the wrong order of McDonald's. I like bad jokes, okay?
It's being filmed right now.
Yeah, it's being filmed.
Very good.
Let's see, where was I? I'm totally lost train of thought now. Oh yeah, so what happened with that, so traditionally what the way unions pay teachers is literally just the number of years you're in the school with a bonus with extra amount of education you get. And also you have insanely large pensions.
What's that documentary that follows the new superintendent for DC?
I have no
You know what
idea.
I'm talking about though? There's
Nope.
a really good documentary. DC got a new superintendent, and she was like, we're gonna fix things, and then the union just like destroyed her. I mean, she just
Or I
was, like,
forgot. There's one other interesting anecdote with looking at just inner cities and the cost of the schools there. So there was a researcher that was, I'm gonna botch up the numbers a little bit. I can send you the link to where the podcast where the researcher was discussing this later if you want. There was a district of, let's see, it was 40,000 students in downtown New York, and this researcher wanted to know how many administrators are there at the district level for this amount of students. So he called into the office and he kept calling different people. He called, I think, over 14 people because like half of them didn't know the answer. The other half did know the answer and weren't allowed to tell him. And finally, he got someone that could tell him. So for this district of 40,000 students, that's something like 4,000 administrators, one administrator per every 10 students. He then goes to a different district, I believe it was in Washington. I'm misremembering that. I'll give you a general idea of it. So this district had roughly 4,000 students. He's like, okay, do the math. It should be 400 administrators. So he calls the office. How many administrators do you have? The guy says, I don't know. He's like, it's gonna be the same thing again, calling 14 people. He says, oh, I don't know. Let me count. 1, 2, 14. So just district by district, you can have literally 20 times as many administrators per student just by district. So, which is not the most
Do
efficient
you know the
thing.
stat on college administrators? The increase?
I know it's increased
There's like,
dramatically.
yeah,
I
since the
don't know how
1970s,
much.
like 300% increase in administrators in colleges.
Yeah.
To go back with government wanting people to show up to schools and high schools, like what my high school did is they gave someone a car at the end of the year if they had like less than they had a weird system. But like if you had perfect attendance, you had a higher chance to win the car.
Oh, I would have won that guy.
Yeah, that actually puts out a lot of people that have
Fuck every
perfect
day.
attendance.
Before years
But like,
grade.
wouldn't they just do that because once they get like a higher percentage of students showing up every day, they get more money from the state? Is that something you know about?
There is a bit of that. I know especially the charter schools in Ohio had a big problem with this, where they were faking the numbers, because charter schools are also kind of, it's not socialist, it's more fascist. It's like government management of privately run stuff. They were faking numbers of students. There are problems of this. There are lots of instances of teachers just faking, faking tests, or for standardized tests, teachers literally like reading out the answers as the tests are being taken. There's a lot of perverse incentives like this that happen. Then the nice thing that happens in the private system is the parents have accountability, and that if the parents are paying for it, they're sending you there to learn. And like, parents care about their children. They will make sure you're going somewhere where you are learning. Like, once again, what's happening in the third world is the parents send their kids to public school, took them back out of the public school and put them back in private school because teachers weren't showing up, and if they wanted to complain, they weren't accountable. And that's the difference.
So then, what are some of the pros and cons of charter schools? Like, are they better than? Is it an improvement from just regular old public schooling?
It can be. It's just when someone talks about something like adding a voucher system for all schools and like letting people go to, because I'm going to go voucher system is easier to answer than charter schools. Good. Someone says, okay, right now 5% of students are private, 95 are public. Why not have a voucher system so any student can go to a private or public school and the government pays for it? The problem with that is the government now runs the schools because they get to say whether or not you get the voucher, and they define what a school is and what a school has to do. So if your goal is to make 0 students dependent on the government money, a voucher system makes 100% of students dependent on the government money. It's a step in the wrong direction. And if you look at it in terms of colleges, in the United States, there's a number of strict requirements on colleges if they accept government money, even things like Title IX, discrimination, all this, private colleges. And how many colleges don't accept government money and like don't follow the rules? Just take a guess. How many?
5.
1. Hillsdale College. Only 1. Yeah.
So I'm kind of reaction to how this works.
Okay.
So you get a voucher, so I take I take the 2,000 off my taxes that
Yeah.
taxes I pay for the school.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously I think over time more people would keep taking those vouchers, but then would it like over time, like until we get to that point, until it gets to the point where most people aren't good at public schools anymore? Isn't that the transition period where they think we're gonna get pretty ugly, at least for
Yeah.
public schools and for public reaction, and it's just gonna keep it's gonna just little signs. Someone will say something like that, like, okay, now you can take a voucher or a tax break, but then as it's getting to the point, people are gonna get pissed at the side effects and then just put it back.
Right now, New York State on average spends $20,000 per student. One of the main complaints by schools is there aren't enough desks for students. It's already ugly. Like it might get a bit uglier, but it's like if your limb is like blistering and infected, you chop it off.
I mean, them having even less money is gonna make people even less money.
But the thing is, we're giving them less money to the school, and we're giving them another option. Right now, they don't have another option.
We keep giving them more money, brings them to better.
Yeah,
I'm not saying they give them more.
the transition period will probably have difficulties, but all transition periods do.
So if you don't want, like,
I want to make it as easy as possible, but I mean, I'm not an expert on the legislative side of it. I mean, there's probably things that can make it easier, and then obviously, if things like a lot people just taking GEDs on their own, educating online and stuff like that can dramatically ease the transition period, because right now you can, for almost the cost of an internet connection powering a computer, you can switch from public school to entirely online for free. So it's not like we're saying that there's a stopgap between public and private schools that exists because of the information that is currently available online. And once again, and a lot of the people that will be stranded by this are people where either they have other ways to get around it, or where they would have been stranded by the system anyways. And there's not a perfect movement out of a bad system. I mean, there's no way to get out of an artificial boom without having at least some amount of recession.
Are you able to either share their sources of this presentation with the
Yeah, no, that's why I'm sending it to him. Yeah, I'm just sending the document. The notice of education is a good one, the rest, but there's a lot of them, so. And then a few of them are just Google. I didn't put them on. You can reverse image search any of the image. I tried to throw in a lot of them. Yes. Yes.
I really enjoy that.
Yes.
And I'm thankful for it.
Yes.
But it sounds to me that you think everything I've learned is useless.
Okay. No, Justin, it's really simple. The question is not what you learned. The question is what you learned relative to what. Have you learned better interpersonal skills through your time working or through your time in class?
Just, he's not saying everything you learn.
Not in class.
Okay. Do you agree that with your expertise and with your focus, your interpersonal skills will be the largest part of your future earnings and salary?
Big chunk of it. I mean, I'm marketing.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. 80% of what you learned either isn't valuable or isn't valuable relative to what you would have learned outside of college.
I like having a big open mind.
Mm-hmm.
I like stuffing that mind with things.
That's good,
Yes.
but other people, but that's a hobby. Like other
Yeah.
people, and if you want to do that, you should be able to.
Every 2 weeks,
Is
I
it
pick
good
a
for
new
everyone?
news source and I read through it. I read through socialistworkers.org. I read through Breitbart.org. I read through Salon. Actually, Salon is one great article title, like just only one. Salon's article title, I think it was from earlier this year, they had an article title that was, over the last year, MSNBC has run 435 articles on Stormy Daniels and Trump, and 0 articles on the war in Yemen.
Yep.
Hashtag resist.
War in Yemen?
Yeah, like, are we in a war in Yemen? Like, you know, I mean, only
We're Obama
20 million people are starving to
We're not
death.
helping
But
Obama.
Obama started it.
Right? So we wouldn't do that, right?
Oh, no. What do you mean when Pentagon came to Congress, they lied about not having troops on the ground?
But the government can lie.
What government can't lie?
Is that about education?
I thought only the keto could.
Yeah. Or been bad.
Okay. So yeah, no, I totally agree. Like, obviously, even though I'm someone who I think it's great to open your mind up, to enjoy diverse perspectives and stuff like that, and to learn more than what's just required of oneself to be valuable in the market, I do think that privatizing, actually, instead of privatizing, putting it to the test of competition, increasing the value in which
The thing is-
would be a better alternative.
I like learning. I'm very much in favor of it. And that's why I did good in school. I would have done better outside of school.
Well,
I go to museums in my free time.
You guys are mean.
I'm a nerd, okay? I have my Pokemon Go Plus in my backpack. I've been catching so much on this campus. I missed it.
But no, I mean, and
I got a work phone. First thing I did, started a second Pokemon Go account. Level 17 by that night.
I didn't know that for some reason.
Okay. Yeah.
it seems also like one thing.
And also, feel free to ask non-education questions.
I haven't had that.
Wait. Can I
Yeah, finish your question.
I think also another point about privatizing that's valuable is that not everyone is as good or cares as much about learning as you or I. And
Yeah,
it's
no.
okay that they have that choice.
Also, when you see technical education, a lot of people do much better with technical education because instead of sitting down and having to read Great Gatsby, you get to play with fire and axes. Like, I know a lot of people that would much rather weld or whatever than read.
I mean, there should be like more like hands-on classes, like wood
Oh, yeah.
shop or working. I mean, some people even like to cook. Like,
Oh yeah, no.
Some high schools have the option after like a certain year to
Yeah.
go and enter.
yeah.
They used to have it all over the place, and then
they just
no child left behind.
yeah. And now we just
Yeah,
like
democracy. Forget about we have our
computer, which is still good, but
Yeah.
What are
Maybe
the,
more variety.
goes into the pros and cons of democracy?
Oh sure.
Is it a good like is it a good system?
So democracy is
neither. So
briefly the tyranny of the majority over the minority. It is inherently oppressing a minority because it is forcing one upon the other, forcing one's will upon others. Especially if you look at something like an unbound democracy, where you like. There's a really simple question that you ask someone if they say they're in favor of slavery. Or, I'm sorry, favor of democracy. What percentage of the population would have had to vote in favor of slavery before it'd be okay? Because if you're in favor of democracy, what percentage of the population needs to vote in favor of slavery before slavery is okay? Because if democracy is an inherent good,
Democracy doesn't protect rights, and the piece of paper called the Constitution sadly doesn't protect our rights,
Yeah.
because we've had our Fourth Amendment rights just voted away.
oh yeah, we don't a lot of rights.
Democracy is exploited every.
But yeah, no, because the thing is, democracy isn't an inherent good. It's a means to an end, and my end is no slavery, more freedom, less people being poor, and all this. If you think democracy is the way to get there, I disagree with you, but that's fine. If you say democracy in and of itself is a good, well, Hitler was elected democratically.
I think the problem sometimes is like democracy is better than like 51% of people controlling everything is better than 10% of people controlling everything. But it's certainly not.
There is
better.
actually
But like from a standpoint of like fairness, right? Like you would say it's more fair for 51% of people to control things than 10%. Like it just.
Well, it's just basically like saying
I
democracy
think
is
the
better than
thing, fair
Yeah, but like
fair
but
isn't
we
the
know that-
process, fair is the results.
Yeah.
And if you look, I believe Hans Hermann Hoppe's book, Democracy, the God That Failed, goes into some detail about things like how kings would actually take a better care of their society than democracy in general, because with a king, you're actually trying to pass on a working society to your children, and with a democracy, well, you vote for whatever gets you elected, which is why like some crazy high percentage of economists agree that rent control is a terrible thing. It's destroyed New York forever, and it's created a homeless problem in LA and all of California, and yet rent control is now again on the ballots and popular because short term it does really well for like political purposes.
I guess I'm just making a point. Like I think people are fond of democracy because
They
it
fail the
usually
marshmallow
is.
test.
Or like we could say, and maybe it's not 100% always true. Like typically better than dictatorship. Or at least more fair to have 51% than 10%. But it's certainly not more fair than having 100% people.
Well, it's not even that. It's democracy. Democracy is just a tool. It's the outcome that is or isn't fair. For example, if we look at legalization of gay marriage in the United States, something I was very much in favor of, if we had asked for a vote on gay marriage, it would have failed at that time. Majority of people were not in favor of gay marriage. A group of 9 oligarchs said gay marriage is now legal. Suck it. If you are pro-democracy, you must be against making gay marriage legal across the U.S. because it was done expressly anti-democratically, against the will of the majority of the people by a group of 9 oligarchs. But you know what? I think the result of gay marriage being legal is more fair than what we would have gotten if we voted democratically. Democracy is just a tool. The results can be good or bad, but it's not an inherent good in and of itself, and a lot of things that come out of democracy are bad. Some good things come, some bad things come, but it's the results that matter.
You said you can support democracy is like the way to do it, then what do you support?
Private property. I think that you own your own body, you own your own things, and that you can do with them what you want. And what that would end up being is like, if you think of democracy, if in this group, what is it? 60% of people want hot dogs, 40% want hamburgers. Democracy means everyone gets a hot dog. What I think is that no one should be able to force you to buy a hot dog or a hamburger. If you want it, you get what you want. And then you want me to do besides that is protect the rights of those individuals. And society is really good at organizing itself if people's rights are protected for property and self and body and determination.
I agree with you. obviously, but yeah.
You're in this club.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
agree.
But like I meant more like the transition there
Back
to
over
get
the
there
load.
in the first
Yeah.
place.
The transition there is relatively easy and
When you go
easy to say, hard to do.
Exactly.
Just keep decentralizing. I mean, why do we still need a federal government for? The thing is, the United States government is the same size, population, economy, military, everything as the entirety of Europe.
Oh, yeah.
Just the government?
No, the United States, like the United States, is the same size in terms of population, economy, geography, everything as the entirety of Europe. If they can be separate countries, why can't we? So break it up and keep pushing more power down to the local level, and then eventually to the individual. As some people want to stay as a city, you can stay as a city. I'm fine with you staying as a city. I just don't want them to make me stay as a city.
You couldn't have such a powerful military to destroy third world countries.
Oh no,
That's
no
great. Why did
bombing.
you choose for
I
engineering?
like pretty fireworks.
my uncle lives here.
I'm gonna ask you a question.
Yeah.
I kind of don't think you can answer this.
Okay.
But
So I was visiting
what
him.
ways in like any society would you guarantee rights? Because they're gonna be stepped on by like
I don't think you
people that can't enforce it, or democracy, which also takes away rights.
There is no utopia. There is only better or worse. And like, even in North Korea, you still have choice. Even in Mao's China, you still have choice. Every day you choose to not kill yourself, and you choose to keep like getting food, whatever else. Like there is no absolute tyranny, and there is no like absolute functional utopia. It's just what's better or worse. And if we're looking at what guarantees rights best, it's a more decentralized option with more choice that does it better.
That's a good perspective.
There are a few interesting examples of this. You can look at something like Liechtenstein, which is a small city-state in Europe. Their what is it? Prince, I forget his name. Prince something that's currently in charge of them is a strong libertarian. He wrote the book States in the Third Millennia, and what he's done is he added to their constitution a clause that any city that wants can vote and secede itself from the country at will.
Wait, what country is this?
Liechtenstein, very small. Tiny, like microscope.
Yeah.
He was actually no, it's a couple cities. He was actually trying to make it so any individual citizen could secede from the country, but the people were like, "Oh, that's too extreme for us." A really good example would be the Greek city-states. Most people they know, oh, Athens, Sparta, whatever. There was over 1,000 city-states, all with different governance systems happening at the time, and you could relatively easily say, I don't like this government, I'm going to that one, and move back and forth. And you actually had a free market
for government.
Yes, exactly. There was a free market government happening. And then what happened with that one also that's interesting is that militarily, they were much stronger than anything nearby them that was of equivalent size. And they managed to multiple times hold us with the strongest armies in the world, and use innovations that people, if you were in a large centralized military and someone tried to ask the high commander to turn all of the mirrors and use them as giant lasers to set the ships on fire, or that we should use construction cranes to lift ships out of the water and drop them on each other, it wouldn't have even made its way up the chain of command. It would have been considered crazy. That's what the Greeks actually did to defend their country. Yeah, laser technology. It's great. Or if you look in terms of their innovation, it's also amazing. They already had the steam engine, and they had the highest living standards in food per capita in that region up until the 1900s. Or you can look at ancient Iceland. They have an interesting governmental structure that you actually chose who your chieftain was, and chieftains gain more power the more people that said they pledged to them. So you didn't actually have to move location. You would be able to change government without actually moving. You'd be in the same spot and you'd have a different chief and follow the rules that you want, and they all came together and kind of checked each other. It eventually fell apart after 4 centuries when one massive family got power all over the place and kind of became an oligarchy, but for 4 centuries is pretty good in terms of governments. So more.
I was gonna say that. I was waiting for someone to think of that. I saw you laughing. I'm like, he's thinking about this thing.
If you could do good meme references, I'd accept it, but they're not great. They're not great.
Okay, we're gonna officially end our meeting now, but still talk. You can still talk to
Yeah.
your